of you visiting, thank you, to the School of Visual Arts and to the Design Criticism MFA department. So we are halfway through our full lecture series. We have some tall tales still to come, and I hope you will join them for us. For those you've missed, there's our site on Vimeo, which you can access through this URL. I think there are about 150 lectures max there now. So here's what I've been up to today. We're actually having great fun assembling a brochure which features the work of graduates of the program, alumni of the program, all the amazing things they've gone on to do after Decrit. And so we're producing this brochure right now, and I have a sneak preview for you of a couple of the spreads. So this is the center spread, and I asked the alumni to describe the program in 10 words or less, and here are some of their responses. I particularly like the one, Decrit is a laboratory for understanding the world we've built. I think that might become our tagline. And this is a typical spread from the brochure, where we'll feature an alumnus sort of talking about what they did before they came to the program, their educational background, what they're up to now, and then subject them to a rigorous Q&A about aspects of their working life. So anyway, the results of these hopefully will be printed in time for our open house, which is on November the 3rd, and which acclaimed graphic designer Milton Glaser will be reflecting on the role of design criticism at. Then we'll hear from faculty members, current students, and alumni of the program. So do come along. Actually, you need to register for that, I think, so you can chat to one of us afterwards about that. But do come along. It should be a really fun morning. And if you're just merely curious about the program, you can stay in touch through our website, which has a whole bunch of good stuff on it, or via Twitter. So on to tonight's show. So as regulars of this program know, this lecture series is primarily the place where we get to hear from people outside the program, who bring for our delight and edification new ideas and working methods from other disciplines, other worlds. But each season I reserve one spot for a Decrit faculty member, because it's really just not fair that only Decrit students should be the beneficiaries of their brilliance. So it's kind of like a counterpoint to bringing outside voices into the program. With this spot, we bring an insider voice straight from the classroom, more or less, last night, right, to you. This season, it's the turn of urban critic, urbane human being, Karrie Jacobs. And Karrie is the author of The Perfect $100,000 House, a contributing editor to Metropolis, where she writes a fantastic monthly column titled America, about ideas and strategies in architecture and how ideas in architecture and design play out in the landscape. She's also a contributing editor at Travel and Leisure, to get that right. Never will acclimatise. And previously, she was the founding editor-in-chief of Dwell. That works. The architecture critic of New York Magazine, and in the early 1990s, she was the founding executive editor of Benetton's Colors magazine, a really seminal magazine for those of you who haven't come across it. So Karrie teaches a key class here at Decrit titled Urban Curation, in which students are really kind of immersed into the controversies that shape the city's urban infrastructure. They meet the major players in government and design. I mean, yesterday we had Seth Pinsky, president of the New York Economic Development Corporation, here at Decrit. And with Karrie this semester, the students have visited the architectural firm Low Tech. They'll get a tour of the 9/11 Memorial and commentary on the new World Trade Center from its chief chronicler, I suppose, Philip Noble, and a tour of Brooklyn Bridge Park with Regina Mayer, its president. In Karrie's class, students scour the streets, curating their own experiences of good and bad, without the help of the white walls of a sanctioned design museum space. And they consider such meaty issues as truth and beauty, in relation to the realities of Times Square and a Hello Kitty store, for example. So tonight, Karrie is here to explore the topic of beauty, and one of those topics, like taste, I think, that even though it lies at the heart of what we do as design critics, rarely gets tackled head-on. Karrie considers that American cities are in the process of embracing or re-embracing the beauty, but in new, ad hoc and unmethodical ways that are really quite typical of the times. So here to ruminate on beauty as it relates to the American city, please welcome Karrie Jacobs.
Thank you, Alice, for that lovely introduction. And yes, I was just here teaching last night, so I feel like I've not left. Actually, this talk starts in the past, very deep in the past, the 1990s. And it starts, I guess, when I was working for New York Magazine. It was really the first time I remember thinking about beauty in the context of the American city. Joe Rose, who was the head of city planning under Mayor Giuliani, gave a speech at the council chambers at City Hall to an audience of developers and civic-minded group leaders and politicians and architects and riffraff like myself. And he announced that he was going to introduce height restrictions into the city's zoning code, which was sort of a radical idea, because then, as now, developers could build extra tall by buying up air rights and in some cases securing bonuses for public plazas. And Rose wanted to abolish those practices. Instead, he announced his intention to impose a specific height limit on each zoning district except Midtown Manhattan and the Wall Street area, and that idea was pretty much heresy. And he also wanted to build in one significant loophole. The city, he said, should be able to grant waivers from some regulations on the basis of exceptional design. And this is what he said, in a turn of phrase that I think was really astonishing to hear inside New York City Hall, most particularly in the Giuliani years. He said, "Let us instill the quest for beauty into the powerful economic drive of this city's real estate entrepreneurs." The quest for beauty? I'd never heard anybody in contemporary New York, let alone a head of city planning, use such language. I mean, had he been reading Baudelaire or Ruskin? Had somebody gotten him a gift subscription to Allure? Maybe he was doing ecstasy, I don't know. Anyway, it was really not clear how this quest for beauty could possibly manifest itself. Like, would there be an arts commission entrusted with determining which buildings were beautiful enough to pierce the zoning envelope, and who would serve on such a committee, and what would their meetings be like? Could you imagine? But then extreme circumstances call for extreme measures. What was actually going on at the time that Rose made the pronouncement? Two things, two kind of unrelated things, except in this lovely split-screen slide. On one hand, Christian Portson Park had just completed a building on 57th Street, the LVMH Tower. It was made of this creamy-looking translucent glass, and the facade was creased and folded and crumpled as if it were made to fit in between the two buildings, which it pretty much had, and it was really squeezed between those two buildings. And the strange shape of the building was Portson Park's response to the zoning rules, which required setbacks. With the help of a very indulgent, deep-pocketed client, an architect had succeeded in using the restrictions of New York City zoning to make something unique and arguably beautiful. Back in the 1990s, this was a very rare occurrence. Meanwhile, across town at First Avenue and 48th Street, the newest confection from Donald Trump was rising. This gangly knockoff of the Seagram's building. Trump boasted it was the world's tallest residential building. He said it was 90 stories, and the building department said it was 69 stories. I know who you think you should believe on that one. So it was just north of the UN, and the neighbors were going insane, and because people on Beekman Place felt there would be like a shadow cast on their street, and all that stuff that happens all the time. So Trump was able to build this tower so tall by amassing air rights from 11 small buildings between UN Plaza and 2nd Avenue, and then by taking advantage of a plaza bonus, he could build another 10%. So in other words, Trump did the opposite of Portson Park. He manipulated existing zoning to make something unique, but arguably ugly. So the way Trump used zoning to his advantage drove Joe Rose at city planning so crazy that he got up in public and he talked about beauty. Needless to say, nothing ever came of it. Well, something came of the Trump building, but not of Joe Rose's proposal. And you can see the most recent Trump building rising over historic Soho, another product of the expert manipulation of loopholes in the zoning law. I don't know, I kind of always think of Trump Soho as like not being in Soho exactly. It's more like Trump Holland Tunnel, but he doesn't call it that. And while I was living on Broome Street for a while, I actually got to be weirdly fond of it just because the glass picks up the light from the sky really nicely. So I almost was willing to forgive that one. But anyway, so I didn't really think about beauty again in the context of New York City or everyday life, except maybe like for the September issue of Vogue or something. I didn't really think about it again until this movie came out a couple of years ago. And I read the review, and it was David Denby in New York Magazine. And he said, James Cameron's Avatar is the most beautiful film I've seen in years. And I thought, God, I've got to go see it. So based on that one sentence, of course, I went, and I was impressed by the craftsmanship. I didn't really like it a whole lot. I didn't think it was beautiful. It just seemed like another environment you'd find in an Xbox game, impressive for the sheer volume of detail and veracity, but not deep enough or soulful enough to be beautiful. So I walked out of the movie thinking that our concept of beauty has been devalued. And eventually I decided that the real problem is that we don't actually have a concept of beauty. It's a word that in the world of the 21st century has no precise meaning and no credibility. If anything, we're suspicious of beauty, and in some areas of culture it's just gone away. And while I believe that electronic information and environments can be well designed and visually engaging, I can't think of an ebook or an app that I describe as beautiful. And I may be missing something. I'm willing to be educated on that. I know I used to routinely describe books and magazines and posters as beautiful, but I don't use that word about websites. So what I've begun noticing lately, though, is that our urban environment actually is increasingly, unexpectedly, and sometimes startlingly beautiful. And sometimes I think that what I'm experiencing is just a renewed appreciation for reality. I spend so much time fixated on a little screen, whether it's my computer or my iPhone, that it's refreshing to look up and be in a three-dimensional, fully immersive environment. Sometimes if I've been working particularly long hours, I'm just bowled over by how good daylight looks. So as Emerson said in one of his lectures about nature, there's no object so foul that intense light will not make beautiful. And I'm really pretty sure he meant daylight, not a backlit LED screen. And then, I don't know. There has been architecture that, I guess the word we've used until recently, although Philip Noble, I think, just declared it over, but there was starchitecture, right? And not all of it was good, and not all of it was beautiful, but I suspect that the snarky term itself represented a refusal to engage the idea of beauty, like an embarrassment at the possibility. So sometimes a building by Gehry or Hull or Maine, all the people that Philip tells me are just completely passé, but sometimes those buildings blow me away, and there are projects by famous architects that really do transform the way I perceive the world. It does happen. But generally speaking, we haven't spoken much about beauty as it relates to the American city in a really long time. Our last conversation, as far as I can remember, as a society, and again, I may be forgetting something, but the last conversation we had as a society about it was during the City Beautiful movement in the 1890s to about 1910. It was a time when urban populations and urban poverty and associated ills were growing. Some reformers tried to improve the conditions of urban slums through practical means, like indoor plumbing and education, but others believed that beautiful urban monuments inspired by the great architecture of the European Beaux Arts movement would teach the tenement dwellers to be moral and virtuous. Every city wanted to be Baron Haussmann's Paris, where the rallying cry of air, open prospects, and perspective forced monumental boulevards through dense neighborhoods, which was beautiful and inspiring, except maybe not so great for the inhabitants of those dense neighborhoods. The once famous expression of this movement, the most famous expression of this movement, was what you're looking at right now, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, the White City along the lakeshore in Chicago, designed by architect Daniel Burnham with a lot of help from Frederick Law Olmsted. The White City was a model of the power of planning and uniformity. You know, lots of our best-loved monuments in this city come out of the City Beautiful movement, the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, the one with the lions in the front. But at the same time, aesthetic cohesion has really never been our strong suit here in the United States. And the City Beautiful movement was perhaps doomed to fail because it was unrealistic, approaching poverty as if it was something that could be simply bulldozed away. Of course, people do still try and do that. And the City Beautiful advocates were just pushing an old world-derived architecture when the New World was just beginning to invent its own signature style, which is the skyscraper. So that was that. We officially turned our back on beauty, at least the word beauty. I mean, we were still building beautiful. Certainly many of our skyscrapers could be described that way. And as Le Corbusier famously wrote in 1936, 100 times I have thought New York is a catastrophe, and 50 times it is a beautiful catastrophe. And of course, you know, it still is. New York City is a beautiful catastrophe. It's just one of those moments on Houston Street that I thought was just made for me. But the dominant theme for much of the 20th century was that while American cities are many things, beautiful was certainly not one of them. American cities have never been harmonious or orderly or uniform, something that was perceived as a problem in the post-war years, and that, you know, people attempted to correct. There was a period where I was actually trying to find essays on the American, contemporary essays on the American city and beauty, and I was just looking, I don't know, in all kinds of collections that I had on my bookshelf, and I came across something, an essay, the closest thing I could find was by an architectural historian named John Burchard, and he wrote this essay. It was published in the Saturday Evening Post in December of 1961, and the title was, "Must Our Cities Be So Ugly?" And what he wrote was that some, though not many, North American cities have been graceful or charming. They have had patches of beauty such as New York's skyline or New Orleans' Beau Carré or San Francisco's Golden Gate, but close up and measured by world standards, none can be called beautiful. He complained about the usual things, the lack of distinct urban cores in cities like LA, elevated freeways, but his biggest problem was the American appetite for novelty. He wrote, here, design is swayed by each new meretricious gimmick. No conviction prevails that harmony may be more important than novelty. The desire for unity has to come first, and this raises prodigious problems. We may face the fact that all the world's greatest urban unities have been achieved under some form of autocracy. Our quandary is how to achieve unity by democratic procedures. Now, you know, guilty as charged. It's Daniel Libeskind shopping mall in Las Vegas with our friend Engelbert Humperdinck in front. And so, you know, here Burchard was echoing, I think, Lewis Mumford, whose City and History was published the same year. And Mumford wrote, "Is it an accident that this aesthetic order, which we first encounter in the processional ways to the temple in ancient Egypt and will meet again in 17th century Europe, came into existence with absolute monarchy and large-scale bureaucratic supervision?" I'd like to point out that monarchs are not immune to meretricious gimmicks. Louis XIV comes to mind. I don't know, I found when I finally went to Versailles after referring to it, you know, endlessly for years and years and years, I couldn't stand to be inside, but outside I thought was actually pretty nice. Anyway, no matter. So even Ada Louise Huxtable, in a 1957 article introducing the Park Avenue School of Architecture, aka modernism, to the readers of the Sunday New York Times Magazine, argued that the geometric nature of curtain wall architecture might return us to the serenity, harmony, and repose of the Renaissance city. She wrote, "Curtain wall construction, properly designed and executed, could deliver us from the present anarchy and return us to the perennial ideal." So all these cries for harmony and aesthetic authority presaged the urban renewal movement in this country, when it was believed that the best thing we could do was raise messy neighborhoods and replace them with meticulously planned developments. There's, of course, Lincoln Center. So, you know, we did that. Last time I gave this talk was in St. Louis, so I threw in Pruitt-Igoe just for fun. But it's sort of weird to me, Pruitt-Igoe, and then that's a new urbanist development in Miami Beach called Aqua. So it's a Andreas Duani, Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg historicist development, except the history in this particular development is the Bauhaus. So I don't know, I kind of thought Pruitt-Igoe and Aqua looked nice together. Anyway, we've matured to the point, I think, where we've begun to see that beauty and harmony are not necessarily one and the same, where beauty can come in unexpected packages and where we understand that there can be beauty in radical juxtapositions. Now, some of these juxtapositions exist pretty much in my head. You know, we have the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, classic Beaux Arts on the left, and then Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate, aka the Bean, which I kind of think as the new Beaux Arts on the right. But some of those juxtapositions actually exist in the real world. One of my favorite pieces of architecture in the last, decade is the Nelson Atkins edition that Stephen Hull did. It opened in 2007, and it's just kind of sitting there next to the Beaux Arts building, 1933 building by Kansas City architects White and White. And I kind of love the relationship that these two buildings have. They're from two completely different aesthetic universes side by side. They're harmonious without being harmonious. So what's going on? What is it about free-range, non-doctrinaire 20th century beauty? I'm beginning to notice that civic monuments that strike me as powerful 21st century evocation of the same kind of symbolic virtue that the 1890s reformers advocated, but with a completely different aesthetic vocabulary and probably with different intentions. I think that two things are happening. One is that we're beginning to remember that our cities are important, worthy of a little grandeur. And the other thing is that our aesthetic sensibilities are changing, taste is changing, and our sense of what beauty might mean is changing, or would be if we stopped to think about it. So I wanted to share with you three relatively contemporary takes on beauty. What I remembered when I started thinking about beauty recently is, of course, Dave Hickey in the 1990s. I thought he had, single-handedly brought the concept back in the art world. His story was that he was on some panel discussion, daydreaming, which is what one often does on panel discussions, wishing that one were at breakfast or the reception afterward. And somebody said, what would the issue of the 90s be? And he kind of woke up and he said, beauty. And everyone got so angry at him that he thought this was really an interesting idea. So from an essay called American Beauty, that I actually think he may have written a little bit later, I think this might be a 2002 essay I'm quoting, he said, John Ashbery once remarked that after we discover that life cannot possibly be one long orgasm, the best we can expect is a pleasant surprise. I think of encounters with beauty in just this sense, as pleasant surprises, positive moments in the history of our free responses to the world. For most human beings, these are far from daily occurrences, but they can be, and they do happen. We encounter the embodiment of what we like, what we are like, and what we want in the external world, and we're delighted. Our bodies, our minds, and the world beyond us coalesce and vibrate like a tuning fork. So in Hickey's mind, harmony is a component of beauty, but it's largely internal. We're in harmony with some aspect of the world, but the rest of the world doesn't necessarily have to harmonize with us. Here's another quote from an essay called Notes on Beauty by art critic Peter Sheldall that I found in Uncontrollable Beauty, a 1998 compilation on the subject by a variety of art critics. Sheldall writes, mind and body become indivisible in beauty. Beauty teaches me that my brain is a physical organ and that intelligence is not limited to thought, but entails feeling and sensation, the whole organism in concert. Beauty is a willing loss of mental control, surrendered to organic process that is momentarily under the direction of an exterior object. The object is not thought and felt about exactly. It seems to use my capabilities to think and feel itself. The best thing I found on the subject was an essay on beauty and judgment, published in 2000 by a Princeton University philosopher, Alexander Nehamis. He begins by declaring beauty is the most discredited philosophical notion, so discredited that I could not even find an entry for it in the index of the many books in the philosophy of art that I consulted in order to find it discredited. Somewhere midway through the essay, and I apologize to my students because I've made them all read this essay, and I've quoted this essay, so they're bored with it by now. And this is a long quote, so I apologize to the rest of you too. I want to turn our common picture around. The judgment of beauty is not the result of a mysterious inference on the basis of features of a work which we already know. It is a guess, a suspicion, a dim awareness that there is more in the work that it would be valuable to learn. To find something beautiful is to believe that making it a larger part of our life is worthwhile, that our life will be better if we spend part of it with that work. The judgment of taste is perspective, not retrospective. The beginning, the middle, but never the end of criticism. If you really feel you have exhausted a work, you are bound to be disappointed. A piece that has no more surprises left, a piece you really feel you know inside and out, has no more claim on you. You may still call it beautiful because it once gave you pleasure, the pleasure of its promise, or because you think that it may have something to give to someone else, but it will have lost its hold on you. Beauty beckons. So beauty beckons. It's a pretty loose standard. All kinds of things beckon. But I don't know. I think that weenie beckons. I've found that the hand-painted hot dogs of Coney Island are uniquely beautiful. Sometimes little fake log cabin motels beckon. I'm sorry to say that the insides of those little cabins are not anywhere near as nice as the outside. In any case, there's a common thread here. Beauty involves a physiological response to visual stimulus. You see something, and the object you're viewing begins to vibrate. You're viewing, and you and that object, rather, begin to vibrate like a tuning fork. You become involved in something larger than yourself. But what causes that response? What does that to you? And if something is beautiful to you, will it also be beautiful to other people? And I guess additionally, does that matter? I don't think there's a standard for beauty currently. I don't think we could agree on it if our lives depended on it. But I have begun to see beauty on a regular basis in our cities that are still unharmonious and chock full of what John Burchard would regard as meretricious gimmicks. I think we're at once loosening up and aiming higher. There is no one standard for beauty, but there is a desire to make things as aesthetically appealing as they can be, and there are some simple things, like the interplay between new types of glass and light, both daylight and artificial light, that conspire to create beauty. Back to Stephen Hole's Nelson Atkins edition. I walked by it one evening, and it was just sunset, and it was glowing. I couldn't believe how ethereal it was, how otherworldly this building looked. The translucent glass panels made me feel like I was looking at the moon. Surely everybody would see the beauty in this building. And I later discovered that a lot of people in Kansas City were really pissed off because they thought this building, which they had caught glimpses of while it was under construction, was truly ugly, in part because many of them mistook the lines in the building, and they mistook them for standing seams that a metal shed would have, so they thought this was a multi-million-dollar Butler building. So I'm sort of hoping they may have warmed up to it. But even if it was a Butler building, I might have found it beautiful too. This is a Quonset hut that an architect in Kansas City I know designed for a gunpowder manufacturer somewhere in the middle of Kansas, and he drove me out to look at it one day. I love Quonset huts, and this is an especially nice Quonset hut. So simple stuff gets to me, much the way that Sheldon described. Some of it is highly idiosyncratic. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to try and sell you on the universality of my taste. But it doesn't make this or whatever any less beautiful, to me at least. So Nehamis sees beauty as an intensely personal experience. He writes that each one of us comes to work alone, drawing a line between ourselves and the work on one side and the rest of the world on the other. I don't know, stuff sometimes just grabs you. The Eames house, which you've seen pictures of a million times. If you actually go there in person, all of a sudden the beauty of its setting and the beauty of the house combine to really create, at least for me, a profound aesthetic experience. I went to Columbus, Indiana, and, which is home to many important works of architecture, a lot of them from the 70s, and I went to see the Venturi firehouse, and I didn't actually think it was beautiful. However, I saw those two little chairs out front, and they just killed me. So there's this personal interaction between the object of beauty and the beholder. The experience can be shared, but not universally, and maybe a few of you will be moved by the things that I've lately found beautiful, but not all of you. As it happens, this is sort of a disclaimer, that my current interest in beauty really took off in Chicago. I went there for the first time in a few years, and I was staying in this, in the hotel that's behind these two parking garages, looking out at the river, and I was just sort of amazed at how gorgeous the city was. I hadn't been there since the early 2000s, and I couldn't remember whether the city had always been this beautiful or whether this had happened in my absence. And some stuff, was a fairly recent vintage. I became fixated on this parking garage. Those are allegedly wind turbines. I have no idea really whether you can truly have a green parking garage, but I was really fascinated by this one. And then, of course, Janine Gang is all over the place building some nice buildings. This is a lousy photograph of a nice building. I don't know. I really think that they get it in Chicago. I think they take their urban beauty seriously there. In any case, the reason why I think it's worthwhile to reintroduce the subject of beauty in an urban context is that we're pretty much over the Baron Haussmann, City Beautiful, Robert Moses urban renewal phase. Our cities are not being beautified through some monolithic top-down strategy like slum clearance circa 1960, although again, that still happens sometimes. For example, the High Line is everybody's favorite example for everything. Honestly, it is. But here it is. And, it's an abandoned elevated freight line, was rescued and turned into a park by a couple of guys who were able to see the beauty that where others didn't, and then convince a lot of other people that their vision made sense. And it's very much to me like the beauty of the pleasant surprise. I don't go there all the time, but every so often I go there, and yeah, it is. It is beautiful. So in fact, the beauty I see most often is the beauty of the pleasant surprise. And the pleasant surprise, the most pleasant surprise to me, is that beauty doesn't simply or only or exclusively exist at the high end. It's found its way into design for the sort of people who are supposed to have been inspired by the City Beautiful movement, but mostly were just swept out of the way by it. This place is in Harlem. It's called David and Joyce Dinkins Gardens. It's an affordable green housing project on 153rd Street that was built by a coalition of community development organizations, and they did this really lovely roof garden. Then, of course, there's the floating swimming pool, which a woman, an architectural historian, Ann Buttenweiser, worked on for, 20 years trying to get it to happen. And finally, one summer it appeared moored off Brooklyn Heights, and I came back from being away for a month or two, and there it was, and it just blew me away. I mean, there was no more amazing place in New York City than the far deck of that swimming pool. Of course, it's now in the Bronx, and that's an outside shot of it, and it's serving a neighborhood in the Bronx, and I assume that it's equally beautiful there. There's our favorite waste treatment plant that Polshek did in Greenpoint, and a sign, it's a close-up of the Staten Island Ferry Terminal sign, it's architect Fred Schwartz and graphic designer Alex Isley used Tobias Frere Jones' interstate typeface and sort of illuminated, outlined it in blue, and it's, I don't know, I every time I see it, I associate the word beauty with it. Of course, beauty can be transitory, a trick of the light. It's something that happens, momentarily. One winter day, I was walking through the Lower East Side, and there was snow on the ground, and I saw this little play structure and thought it was beautiful. I can't make an argument for it right now, but I do have a quote to quote to explain it. Elaine Scarry wrote in her 1999 book on beauty and being just that a vase may catch your attention. You turn your head to look at it, you look at it more carefully, and suddenly its beauty is gone. Was the beauty of the object false, or was the beauty real but brief? And there are a lot of examples of that. That was one of those PS1 installations a couple of summers ago, involving moving poles and little swimming pools and beach balls, and the moment and the installation taken together were beautiful. In retrospect, maybe it's not the most aesthetically perfect thing I've ever seen. Crazy things happen in Times Square sometimes. I happened to stumble on opera, the opening of opera season, in which they were piping opera into Times Square, and every screen had an image of the opera, and there were people sitting in little folding chairs watching the opera. And then there's this one. I gave this talk in Austin. I think the first place I gave this talk was Austin. I got into town. I hadn't been in Austin in a while, and I looked around, and I realized I was giving this talk in a city that really isn't beautiful. And so I was running around desperately trying to find local examples. And Austin has many things, and many good things, but beautiful is just not one of them. And so this is the best I came up with, and I kind of like it. So, again, as Elaine Scarry asks, was the beauty of the object false, or was the beauty real but brief? Maybe a little of both. So two things have occurred recently that I want to mention. First, because I've been giving this lecture occasionally, the thing about Joe Rose, that incident that happened long ago, Paleolithic age in New York City, the 90s, the Giuliani years, but that's sort of been in my head, which is why when I read, there was a draft presentation on city planning has a new zoning proposal for East Midtown, the area around Grand Central, which is mostly about allowing developers to build taller buildings if they jump through certain hoops, provided with subway entrance, and there are a bunch of criteria. So I was reading through this document, and I got to maybe page 60 of 70 pages. Deep in the proposal, there was a section that was called Global Distinction, and it was illustrated with some photos of London's new Shard building by Renzo Piano, and Barcelona's Torre Agbar by Jean Nouvel, and then there were pictures of New York's cherished icons like the Chrysler Building, Seagram Building, Lever House. And, the message of the photos was that we want some iconic buildings, AKA Starchitecture, except we don't say that anymore. Anyway, so this gallery of noteworthy buildings represented by the planning department's desire to allow extraordinary buildings at key sites and reward those special buildings with a lot of extra height, or maybe a lot of extra bulk, or maybe both. The version of the study I downloaded from the city planning website also detailed, or also said that proposals must exhibit superior design relative to both the sidewalk and the skyline. So there were these two phrases, extraordinary buildings and superior design. And I thought it was kind of strange to find that language in a zoning document, because to me it seemed like not so very far removed from Rose's talk of beauty, or at least that's why I noticed it. And I thought it was actually interesting that city planning seemed to be inviting architectural experimentation or flair or something. So I wanted to find out what was going on, and I emailed Amanda Burden's office to find out exactly what they meant, and her press secretary told me that they kind of needed some time to sort out the language issue. And I thought, I wonder what that means. Anyway, so, after some back and forth, about a month later, I finally had a conversation with Amanda Burden, and she said to me, we were absolutely not talking about design. And then she said about the phrase superior design, she said, it shouldn't have been in there. It was in there. If it was in there, it was an error. And then she said, we never talk about design. We have never talked about design. Never, ever, ever. So I've got to say that I found this a little weird. In part because the phrase superior design was in the original document, I wasn't making it up. And by the time I had my conversation with Amanda Burden, the document on the city planning's website had actually been updated, and the phrase superior design had disappeared. But really, I wasn't calling with a gotcha question or to make trouble or anything. I was calling because I thought it was cool. And then she said something I thought was kind of revealing. She said, "I'll tell you, my predecessor had proposed a bonus for design." And I said, "Oh, you mean Joe Rose?" And she said, "Yeah." And she was referring to this thing that I talked about at the beginning. And she said to me, and that was so thoroughly discussed in this agency and so thoroughly rejected by the Planning Commission, and I was on the commission, and I'd been through this before. So that sort of weird forgotten moment in which Joe Rose, had his quest for beauty, made Amanda Burden really skittish about this notion of superior design that had somehow snuck into this document. Sort of put the kibosh, I think, on the concept. In any case, this particular story is in my current Metropolis column. You could read more about it there. But it also made me think a little bit more about the relationship between city government and aesthetics. And granted, zoning is to a large degree about aesthetics. The genius of it is that it turns qualitative ideas into quantitative language, or it turns values into law. So no one ever actually needs to say words like beauty or superior design in zoning normally. But those words are there, they're just implied. Amanda's right, you can't legislate beauty. But I do think you can encourage it. The city actually does encourage it. I mean, that's what the Department of Design and Construction's Design Excellence Program does, which is all about getting better architects to build city buildings. To some extent, it's what the city's design commission does. They kind of have arguments about, things that are built on city property with city funds. And in truth, that's some of what the planning department does, and they should, be proud. Which brings me to the real relevance, I think, of beauty and the American city. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I have taught a workshop a number of times where I do it here. I've done it here, and I've done it in a few other cities. The first time I did it in LA, because I thought someone asked me to teach a workshop at Otis Parsons in LA, and I liked the idea of a workshop titled Truth and Beauty in LA. So anyway, I didn't know what I was going to do, but what I did is I sent the students out, to different parts of LA, and they had to come back with an example of beauty. And some of the students really liked the assignment, and others were sort of offended by it. And this one girl, this Dutch graphic designer, said to me, "If someone says my work is beautiful, I am insulted." So at the end of the workshop, she asked me why I thought beauty was important. And it hadn't even occurred to me that this was a question. So I didn't have a very well thought out answer, but I said more or less, that a desire for beauty might make every component of our urban environment, whether it's affordable housing or a waste treatment plant or a new museum, better than it had to be. And I argued also that beauty is a stronger and more interesting word because there's no consensus about what it means. To me, it's a little weird for me to be talking about beauty because I've been writing about design for a long time, and my approach to writing about design has always been in a social context or political context. It's very rarely actually been, at least entirely, about aesthetics. But I started thinking that actually beauty in the context of American cities, at this moment in 2012, really actually has an impact, or could have an impact, that goes beyond, mere aesthetics or prettiness, or maybe even beyond the pleasant surprise. I was in St. Louis a few weeks ago, and I was there giving a talk about beauty. I actually gave a talk to a room full of very drunk people. It was at an event where there was an open bar and no bathroom. So I gave this talk to a room full of drunk people who I assume really had to pee badly. I certainly didn't. So I think I gave them the fast version. Anyway, and so I was, driving around St. Louis. People were showing me things, and I really think that beauty is an important concept in the context of American cities, precisely because of the way our cities have been neglected. Like you go to a place like St. Louis, there isn't a lot of new development. The old neighborhoods are kind of amazing. They're collections of detailed brick homes dating from the 19th and 20th centuries, but they've been carved up by highways. This was from an overpass that I had to cross to get from the place I was staying to like the nearest place where there was some place to eat. You had to cross the highway. And whenever anybody builds anything new in St. Louis, they try and make it look old. There are lots of newly constructed brick houses, which in truth are not that nice. But what I started thinking that I was seeing on the streets of St. Louis, and what I often see in American cities, is a failure of confidence. You think about St. Louis, and there's the Gateway Arch. Another thing I learned in St. Louis, it's really hard to take a picture of the Gateway Arch with an iPhone. It made me want to get the new iPhones where you could take the panoramic picture, but that was as good as I could get. You can't tell from this particular photo, but the Gateway Arch, it was designed by Eero Saarinen and erected in the early 60s, is really audacious. It's an amazing thing. It's like the best monument ever, and I'd never really seen it up close before, and I honestly and truly think it's a beautiful object. So I got a tour of St. Louis from a guy named Mike Allen, who is a preservationist and historian and kind of a local troublemaker. And he spent a lot of time driving me around the north side of town, which is the black side of town, the poor side of town, and someplace where there's been like zero investment since, I don't know, probably since World War II. It's where the Pruitt-Igoe houses once stood, and there's a documentary about Pruitt-Igoe out now that I hadn't seen, but I was shocked that nothing had been built on the site since the houses were raised in 1972. Basically, there's a forest there. It's really weird. Anyway, so we saw some things though that were mind-blowing. That's a water tower from the 19th century, and it's built. It's out of brick, and it's a Corinthian column, and it's just in the middle of a street. And I just was thinking about, this is 1871, an architect named George Barnett. It's 154 feet tall. I think someone has said it's, the world's tallest Corinthian column. I'm not sure if I believe that. Maybe it's the world's tallest Corinthian column in the middle of a street. I don't know. Anyway, but when I look at the arch or the water tower, even some of the old brick houses, I don't just see beauty, I see confidence. I see a belief in the future. I see the work of a culture that really valued its cities. And here in New York, I think we're fortunate because we have our confidence back, but other American cities are struggling to regain theirs. So I go to cities like St. Louis or Buffalo or even, Detroit, and I see evidence of once, the confidence we once had in those places and then we kind of threw away. So I think it's worth recognizing that we're at this moment that I really sincerely hope is the beginning of a very good moment in the history of American cities. There's a clear generational shift in progress, and cities have become the most desirable places to live again. Even cities like St. Louis are beginning to have an influx of young people, doing sort of the downtown loft thing. And we're beginning to make some generous urban places. We've gotten into the habit lately of creating good buildings and landscapes that are better than they have to be. So I guess what I think is that we should proceed on the assumption that inharmonious as they are and messed up as they are, our cities are beautiful and that they're worth investing in. And we should proceed with the assumption that they're beautiful and they're worth reclaiming. And we should proceed with the assumption that they're beautiful, we can rebuild them with our 21st century brand of confidence. And I wanted to finish this. There's a couple images I didn't show you. There's some St. Louis brick houses. There's some north side of St. Louis where nobody has invested in a long time. There's one little neighborhood called Old North, which is actually being revived with a lot of work on buildings and some street murals. But I want to show you this image because it came out of I taught a summer intensive workshop here, part of decried, and I did the assignment where I sent all the students out to designated blocks in Manhattan to come back with an example of beauty, and the idea is they went as a team. And the team members had to have a conversation. They had to come to some agreement about what beauty might mean and then come back and sort of sell us on both their theory of beauty and the example they found. So this one team, a woman named Irene Chin and Megan Marin, came back with this photo, and I looked at it and I thought, come on. I mean, it's a sidewalk shed. We don't like these. These are not beautiful. You can't convince me. But actually what it was about, this is on 58th Street, the block between, it's between 7th and 9th or 7th and 8th, behind Time Warner Center where the Hudson Hotel is, and the apartment buildings are on this side of the street. And they walked into the sidewalk shed, and what they realized was that the acoustic environment changed, that the noise of Midtown Manhattan was dissipated or changed somewhat by the sidewalk shed, and they made a recording of it to demonstrate this. And so this was their piece of urban beauty that they found, and I thought it was really great. And I just mention this because I think very cool, unexpected things happen when you go out, even into your own city, even in a place that you think you know everything about, looking for beauty. Thank you.
Will you take a few questions on this strong word? Let's come over here. Thanks, Linda. Beautiful lighting. That's fantastic. Thank you. That's a rump. I just have a couple of questions, and then what we do is take a few questions from the first year students, and then we'll open it up to the rest of you guys. I don't know if it's really a question, but I was kind of interested as I was watching your lecture of what struck me as the important role of photography in the story of beauty and its telling, in the sense of its framing and editing. And I wondered if that was something you would also sort of explore. Obviously, the photography, the representation of architecture is a well-trodden area, but I wondered if in relation to beauty, this is something that's kind of, you looked at afresh.
Well, I mean, I've given some thought to the way that architecture is represented in photography, but not actually in relation to this idea and this talk. Certainly some part of this search for beauty, for me, is an excuse to take pictures. And my suspicion is that some part of the revival of passion for our cities is a function of photography and the internet and, blogs and Twitter and Pinterest and all of that stuff, because all the cool things, the things that people cherish about their own cities that no one else knew about are now, online somewhere. Everything is online somewhere. And so I think some of the revival of American cities, back in the 90s, people thought that the internet was going to make cities obsolete because we would just be online. But I think in fact it's made us more passionate about cities. So there is some relationship between photography and how it's deployed. And okay. Do I actually need this?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. If Alice says so.
No, and I know you make it a requirement on your syllabus that the emerging critics that work here, use a camera as a critic's tool, as part of the kit, sure. But I wonder if there's a point where photography fails in terms of beauty, and I think you showed it with that last image, with the construction shed, because from the image we couldn't tell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I use photography as, or at least I want the students to use photography almost as a form of visual note-taking. I wish we could all, well, I don't wish we could all be John Ruskin, because then we'd all be troubled men. But, the thing that he spent a lot of time doing was just studying really deep, close details of buildings and, and doing these amazing drawings. And I wish I could do that. Before there were digital cameras, I used to do some very bad sketches of things because it just wasn't, it took too much time to take a picture and then have the film developed. But, for me, it's more, I don't know, it's not about the formal qualities of the photograph so much as it's a way to remember and take notes and also communicate so the students can explain to each other, here's what I found on 57th Street, and this is why I was so interested in this building. So the photography's an important part of the process, but I'm not sure it's about the photography.
Okay, and then I just have a question about your sort of, to draw back a little and look at your process as a critic before we drill down further into beauty again. But it struck me as I was listening that I had a picture of you as someone developing themes, these eternal themes which underpin and are foundation stones for the way we write about design, truth, beauty, and I know in other areas you've been interested in the concept of silence. Do you work consciously like that, kind of amassing data into these kind of pools and then
these fat folders?
Fat folders, binders, I think.
Well, no, not normally. Although there are folders that I have that have general themes, literal folders that I throw things into. There used to be like a folder for convenience, that I would throw things into. But the truth and honestly, the truth and beauty thing. I think, it started because I wanted something for the first year decried started, that I wanted something for the students to read that was about Times Square and wasn't about Times Square, because I think it's really hard to see Times Square, and so I somehow came up with, and I'm not sure how this happened, but I came up with Ruskin's Lamp of Truth, because it's really, it's not about Times Square at all, but you could make it be about Times Square, and it forces you to really look a little harder at the world, and so that's where truth started. And then honestly, I thought Truth and Beauty in LA was a nice title, and then I had to figure out what I was going to do with it.
I'm just wondering if this is a useful strategy for critics, rather than sort of responding to each assignment to an article in this kind of direct way. If you have this kind of themes of interest, which sort of drive your way of looking at the world as a critic.
Yeah, I think that there are definitely things that I'm collecting at any given time, and whether I'm doing it consciously or not really depends. And some of those things are mundane, like basketball arenas, and some of those things are more high-minded, like beauty, or the transformational power of highways, or there are at any given time there are things that I'm accumulating, and I think that it is a good strategy, because I think a lot of what people do is just react to the latest architectural bonbon. And you always have to do some of that, and I like bonbons as much as the next person, but it's always good to have your own agenda, however you manage to do that.
Well, that's what comes across in your writing, for sure. Let's open up some questions from the first place. Yeah, Anna-Marie.
We talked in one of our classes about how being more well-read makes you a better writer, and I'm wondering, taking that idea to beauty, do you think being well-traveled and seeing lots of different cities, architecture, and that sort of thing strengthens your approach to beauty, or is that necessary?
Yeah, I think the more you travel and the more cities you're familiar with, it sort of gives you a broader vocabulary, just in understanding how things work and how cities function, and it's handy to be able to make references when you're writing to other cities and other places, but I think it broadens your, it's not just aesthetic vocabulary, sort of a cultural vocabulary, or just really your knowledge of how the world works. Always good to know more than one subway system, and know how waterfronts work in different cities, and what it's like to cross the street in Shanghai as opposed to crossing the street in Manhattan. And those things are good to know when you're writing about something. It's the more you know, the better off you are, to some extent.
Hence, surely working for travel and leisure.
Well, travel and leisure is nice because they pay the expenses. So every so often I get to go somewhere and add another city to my portfolio.
So I guess my question is,
Well, I think there's sometimes a thin line between ugly and beauty, or ugly and beautiful. But again, some of it I think is just in this heightened response. I mean, I really think that the thing that Sheldon was talking about, this almost physical response to something, and that physical response is also a response you might have to something really ugly. But I'm interested in sort of those powerful aesthetic experiences.
Perhaps that's part of that tuning fork analogy we use of vibrations, of the move forward together. Is that a timeless concept that both can coexist, or is that something more recent?
I don't know. I would guess that it's a concept that's been around for a while. Just sort of thinking about paintings of animal innards and those sorts of things that that there are certainly paintings from the 15th or 16th century, anything involving crucifixion, and that there's sort of a funny relationship between horror and beauty there that I'm not equipped to to explore fully. But I mean, certainly those two things have coexisted for a long time.
How has the deliberate search for beauty changed you as a critic and maybe even as a person?
God. Well, it goes back. I mean, the thing that I like about the deliberate search for beauty is it really does force you to look harder at your surroundings and differently at your surroundings than you otherwise might have. I think before I came up with this particular gimmick, one of the things that I like to think about sometimes in New York City was just, especially when I'd come back from traveling, is just to try and look at your own city the way you look at a city when you're a tourist. When you're a tourist, you're always like saying, oh, that's a really interesting railing, and that's, that sidewalk material is really exotic, and all this stupid stuff that you would never really look at home, all of a sudden you're looking at really hard. And so sort of to bring that same sensibility where you're curious about everything to your own city. So I think that the beauty scavenger hunt scenario is just another way to force you to look really hard at your mundane surroundings. The funny thing is that in St. Louis, I actually assigned them blocks in St. Louis. So all the drunk people who had to pee got all excited, and they came and got little slips of paper in which I had written down blocks in St. Louis, and they all went off, and they were supposed to come back the next morning. But of course, they weren't students. They were, civilians, so they didn't have to come back the next morning. And only one guy did. And, which was fine by me, because I was able to get out of there sooner. But the guy who came back had happened to pick a block that was about 2 blocks from where he lived. And he had all these pictures, and he was like, oh my God, there was this stone railing that was there, and I've never seen it. And look at this sewer manhole cover. Isn't this incredible? And he was just in this. It was like, he was, like he'd, taken a psychedelic drug, that there was all this amazing stuff close to home. So it was kind of cool in a way. And he got up on stage and was the only person who'd come back, and he talked for 15 minutes about all this stuff that he had seen on, 2 blocks from his house. So I don't know, I think there is some magic in it. I don't know.
I wonder how careful critics have to be stating something to be beautiful. You gave the example of Avatar.
You gave the example of what?
Avatar before, and you went to cinema to see that.
Avatar. The funny thing is that it's not a word that I would want to use very much in criticism. I think that I've gotten into the idea of talking about it in the context of American cities because it's a little counterintuitive. I don't think I would use it too much, but if you actually mean it, why not? And David Denby, God bless him, probably did mean it. But I don't know. I guess my thing about beauty is having people really love and care for their cities, because I think that that's something that's missing, not so much in New York City, but in other cities in this country. So that's really, it's not so much about getting people to use the word beautiful, but applying it in certain situations. That's really what's of interest to me.
And is that meaning accrues with the context in which it's used, or would you advocate actually defining it?
Yes and no.
Yes to the context.
Yes to the former and no to the latter.
All right, let's open up some other questions. Jane, this is some questions.
Yes, she's the expert. I'm just an amateur.
Ritual beauty. Yes.
You said that someone had asked you early on the importance of beauty, and you didn't really have a fully formulated answer for her, and I was just wondering what your answer would be today.
Well, as I say, it hadn't occurred to me that that was even a question. I thought it was obvious, then I realized, of course, it's not obvious. And I guess I gave my answer toward the end of the talk, that I think that if we proceed with the idea that our cities are beautiful despite, I think it goes back to this idea we used to think, oh, our cities are not great, they're disharmonious and they're messy and we can fix them. And I think that it's about valuing our cities and building things that are better than they have to be, and I don't know, just really, I'm not sure that this is a definition. I mean, the honest to God truth is that I'm not sure I have a snap definition. I think it's important in the context of our cities to imbue them with beauty and to make them, to sort of rebuild them for the 21st century. But I'm not sure. I'm not making sense right now. I'm sorry.
So do you think it creates more of an attachment for people to live there if they can find it?
I just think that, thinking about cities that have been disparaged for a long time. I mean, everyone in St. Louis kept saying, oh, we have an inferiority complex, and every other city is better than ours. I think that seeing the beauty in a place is just a way to start valuing it and valuing what's there, and that's part of the process of building new things, which in New York City isn't such a big deal because we build new things all the time, but in other American cities there seems to be an absence of investment. So I don't know, it's sort of a different philosophy than bulldozing what's there to build new things. It's like valuing the context.
On that vein, I think having interest in your city and this idea of beauty, there's always old or new. It's hard to see them coexist. You either love your city the way it is and you want to preserve old things, or you don't like something and you want to tear it down and build something new. Can they coexist?
Well, the funny thing about the Midwest is that there are lots of old things, but there's also a lot of space, and in truth, in a lot of those cities, you really don't have to tear anything down unless you really want to, but there's also this lack of investment so that new things don't get built. The thing I kept on hearing about in St. Louis was that there was some guy who'd been buying up all this land on the north side in these sort of African-American neighborhoods, and who was planning on building warehouses or something. It was something that didn't exactly make sense and no one could quite explain it, but it wasn't something that was going to make a better neighborhood. It was something that, was tied in with his theory about air freight or something. So I don't know. I think that I'm not particularly a preservationist, I like new stuff, but I think that both things can happen, that valuing the old does not preclude building the new.
So do you think the most opportunity for that to happen is places not so dense urban populations like New York, but in the Midwest and other places?
Well, I just think that that the populations of a lot of those cities have declined, and they're actually really nice cities, and the Sunbelt cities that everyone ran off to are not such nice cities, and so I think that there's a real opportunity to invest in and rebuild those places and have them be, fully functioning, desirable places again, and we've somehow, sort of screwed up a little by abandoning them, and maybe people are beginning to realize that. That's someplace where it's not 110 degrees and where you don't have to worry about, where the water supply is coming from, might actually be a good place to live. So.
Karrie, this is speculative, but it seems to me that some of those cities where people don't have a lot of pride, when you talk to them about their city or their town, they talk about events. They love they build something for the local county fair or the 4th of July parade. And I wonder if there is some way that we could reinvest people in the design of their cities if it got tied to some of those kind of communal coming together.
There are lots. I mean, those events, whether they're farmers markets or taste of whatever city it is. Yeah, I mean, and I guess the thing about those events is that they're not very capital intensive. So as opposed to like building a new building, yeah, I don't know, design stock.
Take a last question. No, I would take. Okay, so
I have a question. It seems to me in a way you're strategizing a way to redeploy beauty as a word separate from taste.
Yeah, because I think beauty is stronger and more erratic. Not erotic, erratic. And taste is so dignified. And I guess, again, this sort of goes back to the inharmonious thing, which I think is, one of the great virtues of our cities. And so taste, and reliance on taste may in fact be a problem. Is that an answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we have taste and beauty combined on this wine night school, so I do invite you all to come and have some wine and cheese with us. Before we do, please join me in thanking once again Karrie Jacobs.